Good morning, everybody. Thanks very much, Molly. Greetings from grey, overcast Liverpool this morning. My name's Colin Foley, as Molly just said. I'm the training director for the ADHD Foundation, the neurodiversity charity, and it's my absolute pleasure here this morning to deliver this presentation for you on strategies to support self-regulation this Christmas. Can I just say, just before I get into the presentation, just of course to thank the Witherslack Group for asking us to deliver this presentation for you. We've been working in partnership with the Witherslack Group now for a number of years. It's a very important partnership for us, and we're very proud to work with the Witherslack Group because of the wonderful work that they do in supporting neurodiverse children and young people within their schools and within their children's homes as well. So thank you to the Witherslack Group and to Molly, as ever, for a great organisation of these sessions. But most importantly, everyone, thank you to you for taking time out of your busy lives, especially at this time of the year, to engage with this webinar this morning. So I'm going to talk for about 45 minutes and then we go back to Molly, and Molly is going to talk through any questions that you might have. So please feel free to interact and put any questions in the chat box that you'd like me to address, and Molly will facilitate that towards the end, everybody. So how are we all feeling? We're here today to talk about Christmas, and Christmas is all around us, isn't it? Where are you up to? Are you ready? Are you feeling really looking forward to it? Is it still in that stressful phase, or have we got everything ready? Or actually, does Christmas not mean that much to you at all? I've got my tree up. I'm starting to buy presents and write cards, so I'm still in that time where, you know, you've still got things to do before you can kind of just relax and think, right, it's ready. If some of you can, of course, ever think like that, and I'm ready, and let's just enjoy Christmas. And what I'd like to do, everyone, just to start off, is just to say very quickly, if this is the first time that you have engaged with the ADHD Foundation in any way, I know some of you will have heard presentations by myself or colleagues through the Witherslack Group before, but if you're interested and you want to find out a bit more about us and the work that we do, there's our website. We have lots and lots of resources, particularly for parents and carers of neurodiverse children and young people. So if this is the first time that you're engaging with the ADHD Foundation, hello, thank you. You're very, very welcome. And there's our website for more information. I'd like to start, everyone, by telling you a bit of a story, a Christmas story. This is a true story, but that happened to a friend of mine. And the reason why I'm going to tell you this is because it reflects a lot of the themes that I'm going to talk about in this presentation. And it's about a friend of mine, and she's bringing up her grandson, who has a diagnosis of ADHD, autism, and what's called SPD. Some of you will be familiar with this, which is sensory processing disorder. So he has very acute sensory needs. And it's about her experience with him at Christmas. She's brought him up since he's been a very young child, and she is, this friend of mine, the Christmas queen. She loves Christmas. Her house is like a grotto. She's a great cook. She likes having all of the family around and lots of friends around. I go every year and I love it. And she cooks dinner, and it's very, very exciting, kind of festive environment that she tries to create. And as her grandson was growing up, she would be thinking for months and months about things that she could do with him, how to make his Christmas really good. And every year, they would have some kind of challenge. Either he would have a meltdown, in some cases more than one, over the Christmas period, or he would go into shutdown where he would just freeze and start refusing to engage with anything that she had planned and organised. This was often happening in front of other people, where, you know, we've all gathered together to enjoy ourselves at Christmas, and there's one of the family who is in obvious distress, and that makes it really challenging for everyone. And she couldn't work out right? Why this kept happening. And every year, she said to me, she'd organise more and more things to kind of, meet her grandson's needs as she perceived them, to make Christmas really good for him. And then there were the issues and the challenges that she was having kept persisting year after year. And she said to me that by the time he got to the age of 13, she said, we had the talk. I said, what do you mean the talk? Do you mean the birds and the bees? She said, no, the Christmas talk. And she said she thought about it. She talked to people about how to approach this with him. And she did it by talking about one of her relatives. Now, this relative of hers isn't really that interested in Christmas, doesn't really like to engage. Often he won't accept the invitation and go round. And she was telling her grandson about this relative and saying he's just not that interested in Christmas. It doesn't mean as much to him as it does to other people. And that's absolutely fine. And she said there was this pause, and she could see her grandson trying to work this out. And then he then said, after a few minutes, Grandma, I'm not that interested in Christmas. I don't get that excited about it, and I find it a little bit difficult. And it was a breakthrough moment. She said she was able to say to her grandson, well, do you know what? That's absolutely fine. And what they then did was that she talked to her grandson about what does he like about Christmas. And of course, the two things that he liked about Christmas, one, remember he's autistic, he loved the presents that she bought him because he knew exactly what he was getting. He talked about it to her for months and months, what he wanted for Christmas, and she'd make sure she'd buy him exactly what he wanted. And so there was no surprise element there. And so he would have the presents that he wanted so that he could play with over Christmas. And he liked some of the food. Some of the different foods that she was cooking, so that she said to him, all right, let's make a deal. Okay, this is our special day. We'll call it that. We won't even call it Christmas. We'll make sure that we do the presents in the morning, and we'll make sure that you have the foods that you want. But she said the rest of the time, Christmas Eve, Boxing Day, that gap between Christmas and New Year. She said, if people come round, then obviously we would want you to come and say hello to people as they come around, but you don't have to stay for the whole thing. You can go into your bedroom, you can be on your own if you want to be, you can play games. There's absolutely no pressure, right? I won't be planning things for you. We can plan things together that we might like to do, but I won't plan anything without talking it through with you. And she said what was really striking was this look of kind of, how would you describe it? He kind of visibly relaxed when they had this conversation, and he said, Grandma, that's exactly what I want, and I feel a lot better about Christmas now. And what's been really interesting with this, everyone, is that she said to me, and he's now in his late teens, so this was about 4 or 5 years ago. He said, over the years, progressively, he has started to engage much more in the kind of social aspect of Christmas, the people who come round. Obviously, he's getting older and he's maturing a bit, of course, but also taking all of that pressure away from him had been really, really successful and a really good strategy. So the message from me, everyone, is that this is your Christmas, this is your child's Christmas, and therefore, as a family, I think you should feel empowered to design the Christmas that works best for your family. And all of the rituals that we've created for Christmas and all the things that we do, all the opening the presents in front of everybody else, all the expectation around we must all socialize with lots and lots of different people. It's important to see people at Christmas. If that is causing your child a degree of anxiety and difficulty, then why are we doing this? If we want Christmas to be a fun, enjoyable experience for your son or daughter, let's create the rituals that your family-specific rituals that work for you and can make sure that your child, is as regulated as possible over that period. So the first thing I'm saying to you, of course, is that build-up. that preparation, which is really, really important. And I deliver a lot of courses on mental health and anxiety. And one of the key strategies that I talk about when I talk about anxiety is, let's think about those anticipatory periods. The family that I was telling you about, one of the things that the grandson said was he didn't like the advent calendar, because the advent calendar from the 1st of December is this countdown to Christmas. And he said, and that would make him feel even more anxious. So she said, all right, then we won't have an advent calendar, for example. But that build up, that preparation. Now, for some people, that's just as exciting as Christmas itself. I was talking to a friend of mine last Saturday, and he's a nurse, and he's been a nurse. He's my age, he's in his 50s, but he's been a nurse all his professional life. So he's worked a lot of Christmases. And he said to me, I'm not really that fussed about Christmas Day and Boxing Day, because very often I'm working. He said, what the exciting part of Christmas is for me, he said, is that build up, those weeks before, when everyone's talking about it and all the decorations are up and all the shops are full of Christmas stuff. But that build-up time, that preparation time, is thinking about how we prepare our children in order to manage their way through that, but also is to use that time to really think through and talk to your sons and daughters about what they would want for Christmas, what rituals we could create within our family, and understand that build-up period towards Christmas that we're right in the middle of right now could be a source of anxiety for your children, and could be resulting in some degree of physical and emotional distress. And I put the word physical in there because we must never forget, everyone, that anxiety, of course, is a physical response as well as a mental response. And if your child is repeatedly, saying to you that they feel sick, or they feel tired, or they've got a stomach ache, or they've got a headache, or they're bored is the other one, of course, or tired, that obviously there could be something else going on as well. But one of the things that could be going on is that this is a manifestation of sustained anxiety. And your child, however old they are, but particularly if they're younger, won't have the language to articulate that to you, won't understand what it is that's happening to them. They just know that they feel physically that there's something wrong, and they're not comfortable with that. And it could be that they're beginning to experience that anticipatory anxiety that goes with the build-up to Christmas. And if your child particularly is autistic, then you will absolutely recognize what I'm about to say, which is that uncertainty about what is going to happen over the Christmas period. People are going to come round to the house, or we are going to go to somebody else's house that we are maybe not familiar with, maybe haven't been there before, or maybe you have been there before, but it's going to be different this time because we are different at Christmas. And what is going to happen when people come round, or we go to somebody else's house? And that uncertainty can be very, very significant, particularly for autistic young people. I obviously deliver training courses on autism, and the longer that I study autism and learn about autism and talk to autistic individuals, I just think that understanding of the role that anxiety plays within so many of the features and presentations of autism, and this might be happening for your child. When we say, so we're all going to Uncle So-and-so's and we're going to be there for hours on Christmas Day, what does that actually mean? And what is the expectation of your son or daughter in that situation? What are they going to be asked to do that they might find challenging? So the more preparation that we give around what we want to do at Christmas, but also what we have planned for Christmas, is the better we can make it for your child. And the key word, everyone, and it's the same word that we talk about in terms of mental health all the time, but it's a key phrase, particularly for autistic individuals, which is to recognize how important change is for young people who are neurodiverse. You will know, for example, particularly with autism, is that your son or daughter may have what's called repeated behaviours and routines in their life that provide a lot of safety and security for them in their life. The more structure that autistic individuals put into their life can act as a buffer to some of the confusing and challenging world that is around them, with unpredictability of different people's needs and wants and different ways of communicating. That structure and routine that your child has created for themselves, which you, of course, may well be facilitating for them, is often upended at Christmas, isn't it? But not only what we do, the activities that we do, but people's behaviour is often different at Christmas. I always remember growing up as a child, and we would play games as a family at Christmas. We'd never played games at any other time of the year with my parents and my brother and sister. We had our own friends, we did our own things, but we came together as a family for quite a significant period of time, particularly at Christmas. So have a think about what is different. Okay, what is the change that we see with the Christmas period? The environment, the physical environment, all of these decorations that we have up. If your child has sensory needs, what are the sensory implications of the change? The different smells, the different textures, but just also the kind of, as I mentioned before, that social aspect of Christmas, where we know that particularly for young neurodiverse people, ADHD as well as autism, that the need to socialise, and how do we socialise, and often for prolonged periods of time, can be very, very challenging, and there can be social and communication challenges with ADHD and autism, and it might be worth preparing your child for this to an extent, to help them to regulate themselves. The more challenges that are on your child at the Christmas period, the more chance that they might feel dysregulated and all the behaviours that we see. So it might be having a word, depending on how old your child is, and you feel that this is appropriate, about how do we socialise, what do we say when we receive presents, how do we converse with people, what could we converse with people around. Your grandfather's coming, your grandfather's into this, so why don't you think about asking your grandfather a couple of questions about this subject that that your grandfather is particularly interested in. And then thinking about going somewhere else, going to other people's homes, the travelling implications of that, if there is any particularly, but that level of unfamiliarity, which would breed that kind of change, can be really significant. And remember, this might be, going around to your grandparents, might be something that you do on a regular basis. So it is a familiar environment, but again, there may well be changes within that environment, and it's about preparing your child for that. I often talk about, rehearsals and, maybe going round there for a brief period just before in the week, maybe running up to Christmas. So you say, well, this is the journey that we'll take. This is where we'll park. This is what, grandma's house looks like when we go round this Christmas, for example. So a little bit of preparation can be very, very useful. And the same with really unfamiliar environments, of course. We go out to restaurants, we go to see performances. There might be different social expectations of this. I remember another friend of mine who has an autistic son who said that when the first time that they took him to a pantomime, he couldn't work out, or he was having difficulties with the fact that there are times in the pantomime where it's acceptable for the audience to shout out. things. And of course, they're often the same things, aren't they, that you shout out, he's behind you. But her autistic son was struggling with the fact that, well, if I can shout out, why can't I shout out anything at any point during the performance? And he was struggling with that. And also, because he was quite young, he was also struggling with the notion of the baddie within the pantomime, and he was getting really angry every time this actor walked on the stage and was shouting out. And I think in the end, my friend had to kind of take him out for a bit and try to explain to him that the shouting out was very, very structured, very organized. And, people know when it's okay to shout out and when it's not okay to shout out. And he was, struggling with those kind of social expectations that we, neurotypical people may be very, very familiar with or comfortable with. So again, that preparation, that talking through, that rehearsal, if you like, I'm sure a lot of you will be familiar with the strategy of social stories, or we can adapt that strategy, can't we, to talk your child through various scenarios, explaining the scenario and thinking about different ways that we can respond and react within those different scenarios and what could happen as a result. And the more important I think it is to do this when we are talking about particularly unfamiliar situations and venues that your child might go to. That friend of mine, she has a Chinese restaurant quite close to home that she goes to quite a lot now with her son. But when he was quite young and she would go there, she kind of talked to the staff and they would let her just come in and have a look around, sit at a table for about 5 or 10 minutes and then leave with her child. So that it was about just preparing him and easing him in to that unfamiliar venue and what is acceptable about, how loud you speak, what can you say, where you can move around that space. If you think about all those unwritten rules that go with, say, an environment like a restaurant. And then, of course, let's not forget, and some of you will be very, very familiar with this, the sensory needs of these environments. If you're new to your journey in terms of neurodiversity, is recognizing how important sensory needs can be for a range of neurodiverse conditions, but particularly autism. Children and young people who are autistic can have what's called hypersensitivity to various sensory stimuli. So they will have an over response to various sensory experiences. So the obvious example of this would be a child with their hand over their ears if they were hypersensitive to noise and sound, for example. And in a situation like this, children and young people, and indeed adults as well, who are autistic, will start to present what's called sensory avoiding strategies. So they will try to reduce or suppress or even remove that sensory experience. So a child who gets up and leaves, for example, if the environment is too noisy. This can be an issue, of course, if your child is hypersensitive to taste. Then your child may opt for, and I'm sure some of you do, may opt for quite a low flavoured, quite predictable and repetitive diet. They need the comfort and security of certain foods. And then we come to Christmas, and we have all these different foods. Your child, don't be surprised if your child might not want to engage with that. But we also have what's called hyposensitivity. And that is where children and young people have an undersensitivity for various sensory stimuli, and they will present with what's called sensory seeking behaviours. They will seek out that sensory experience. So just to take the example of taste, of course, then you might see, for example, children and young people who may opt for or seek out very high flavored food, hot, spicy food, if they are hyposensitive to taste. Now, obviously, you know, food plays a really significant role within Christmas time. Christmas is often characterized by very specific foods, isn't it? And we are being bombarded by advertising at the moment to get us to buy different foods. Again, that preparation can be really key here. I often talk, and I've delivered training sessions in the past about some of eating challenges and food challenges for neurodiverse children. And sometimes it's important, isn't it, to give what we call trying plates. So small plates of different foods that are presented progressively to children and young people with no pressure. So if they just want to try a bit, that's absolutely fine. And maybe have a think about that in preparation for the different food that you are going to serve, or you are going to be served by other people in other people's homes. And also that communication with other people. If you're going round to your relative's house or a friend's house, and they are going to be serving food, is there a conversation to be had there about, well, can you make sure that you serve something like this, so that I know that my child will eat that and feel comfortable with that? They might try other things, but I need to know that they're going to be fed with something. And I'm sure that your relatives or your friends who are hosting you will be amenable and accept it, and will accept that and try to support you with that. But just a last word, everyone, on sensory needs. And of course, some of you will be very, very familiar with this. But if you are at the start of your journey with neurodiversity, can I just say, sensory needs can be incredibly overwhelming for some children and young people. It can be the difference between coping in this situation and complete meltdown, and the need to get out of this situation. I was reading just recently a report by the National Autistic Society that was talking about school for autistic children, and saying that for many, many autistic children and young people, the environment of school, the noise, the smells, the sounds, the amount of different demands being made on them in terms of communication and interaction can mean that many, many children and young people who are autistic are on the edge of sensory overload day in, day out. Now, you can easily transpose that, can't you, to an environment in a busy, noisy household where everyone's kind of in that, a jolly space, enjoying themselves at Christmas. You could see how that would be overwhelming. I'll talk about some strategies for that in a minute. So we've talked about some of the challenges here, and this slide has given you just a little bit of a kind of a recap of that. But I just want to talk about fight, flight, and freeze. If your child is going into meltdown and you are at the beginning of your journey around neurodiversity, is just understanding what is actually going on in that situation. So there's a picture of the brain, everyone. The top right, the top left, sorry, you can see, I'm sorry if you're colorblind, but for those of you who aren't, it's the purple section of your brain is your frontal cortex and your prefrontal cortex. This is the engine of your brain. This is what happens when challenges come to you. This is the part of your brain that regulates those challenges and responds to it. This is the part of your brain that thinks, oh, well, I've been here before. I know how to cope in a situation like this. I can just say, politely say, no, I don't want to eat that. Or I can say, do you mind if I just leave the room for a minute? I know who I can go to for support. I know I can go to mum and dad and they'll help me. That's the part of your brain that kicks in when you perceive a threat coming to you. It's the part of your brain that kind of regulates that. Now, what happens when children are feeling very, very anxious and indeed may have a neurodiverse condition is that that part of the brain doesn't operate as effectively in other times. So what happens is the threat or the perceived threat to your child goes straight through the frontal cortex. And that part of the brain, right, which is helping other people to say, I know how to deal with this, I know who I can ask for support, isn't activating, and the danger or the sense of danger goes straight to the limbic system, which is your child's emotional brain. And it's, apologies again if you're colorblind, but it's the pink structures in the middle, the ones with the boxes to the left, okay? They're in the middle of the brain. They're sometimes called the midline structures because they're in the middle. And something when that perceived threat goes through to the limbic system, it activates something called the HPA axis. Now, some of you will be very familiar. Please humor me if you're very, very familiar with this. Okay, so the HPA axis is firstly the H, which is a structure in your limbic system called the hypothalamus. And that's the part of the brain that has spotted the danger. Now, when I say danger, it could be a danger. Someone's coming at you with, to punch you, for example. That's a real danger, of course. But it could also be a perceived danger, a presumption of danger. I'm now just walking into this busy, noisy environment, and I'm not going to cope with this. And I know that this is difficult for me, even if nobody's making any direct demands on your child. The presumption of threat and danger. So then the H, the hypothalamus, activates the P, the pituitary gland. Now, this is a gland, so it secretes hormones. That's the function of a gland. And that's the part of the brain that releases two things. One is adrenaline, but the other is cortisol. And cortisol is the stress hormone, and this is where the blood runs out of your stomach and it goes to your extremities, to your limbs, to get you ready to fight. And this is an unpleasant physical feeling, butterflies in your stomach. So it's a physical feeling as well. So this is preparing your child to manage that threat in the whatever way that's going to work for them. That then activates the A, which is the amygdala, and this is what produces the response. So this is when your child fights back, or your child freezes, or your child tries to run away and get out of it. And remember that when your child is in that space where they've got into meltdown, and some of you will be very familiar again with this, is that always remember that that is not the time for you to try to argue with them, to rationalize with them, to explain, to get them to communicate something to you. Your priority in that moment, where in terms of their self-regulation, is to keep them safe, to keep everyone else safe in that environment, and to ride out the meltdown and through into the recovery phase. It's only when your child's come through the recovery phase that they'll then able to respond to you rationally. And I always say, if your child's going into meltdown, do not punish the meltdown, okay? But do please talk to your child after the experience, when they've gone through the recovery phase. And I'll talk about this, why it's important to do this in terms of promoting self-regulation with your child after the experience, okay? But it's understanding that actually when your child is finding those challenges and all the behaviors that we see, that there is something going on there neurologically that your child is having to deal with in that moment. And remember, if they are acutely anxious or have high levels of anxiety, and this is my favorite quote from McCulloch about anxiety, is that it blocks up the brain. Think about yourself, everyone. What's the things in your life that make you feel anxious, and how difficult it can be to remove those thoughts or to rationalize those thoughts sometimes, and how that can stop you from thinking of solutions, from remembering things, from being able to pay attention to other things, because you are constantly what's called hypervigilant to what is the threat or the perceived threat that is around you. Okay, so I just thought I'd mention that, the most, obviously most extreme cases. And just to say that cortisol, of course, if a child, if cortisol is being released on a very, very regular basis, that actually, you know, it can have a significant impact on learning, but it can also have long-term physical implications. A bit of cortisol isn't bad. You know, there is good anxiety, good stress, because it keeps you alert to danger, of course, in small doses. There's nothing wrong with it. In fact, it's good. But when it's being released consistently and constantly over time, it can have significant implications. So let's move on, everyone, to giving you some practical strategies now that we've talked about some of the challenges and the difficulties. The first point is what I said right at the beginning. This is your Christmas, your family Christmas, so you will create the traditions that work best for you. I remember doing a session like this a few years ago, and a parent telling me that her autistic son doesn't have to open his presents in front of everybody else, that he leaves the room and opens his presents kind of on his own, because he gets very overwhelmed with the idea that everybody's looking at each other and watching each other, and what is the correct response to make when you get a present that you didn't want, or don't understand why someone's bought that for you, or you can't think of what you do with it. What is the correct response back? And he would get overwhelmed in that, and it would ruin, you know, the process of him getting presents. So he goes into his bedroom and opens them himself. We talked about that gradual preparation time, you know, through talk, exploring sensory needs, practicing it, but also critically, as you as the adult, and modeling this for your child. How do you deal with different situations? How do you deal with change? How do you deal with busy, noisy environments with a lot of stimulation all around? And remember, let's put breaks in. Okay, the children will need alone time, particularly if you've got teenagers. Teenagers need to get away from their parents for periods of time and have a break for that. Are you structuring that in to your plans for this Christmas? We think about ADHD, particularly one of the best strategies for ADHD to encourage focus and concentration is to get your child active. Christmas can be quite passive, kind of quite sedentary. We've all sat there on Christmas Day night thinking, how much have I ate? You know, so how can you include opportunities for your child to really move their body, of course, with this, but also just think about what I call the cumulative effect. And this means that often when we plan a lot of things back to back and you're moving from one space to the next, and even if your child's engaging and doing well in those different environments, the cumulative effect of this for the whole day, the amount of cognitive and physical and emotional energy that your child might be expending in order to cope with all that, by the evening or at night time, you might notice your child's becoming dysregulated and you're thinking, but they've had a really good day and they've done really well all day. It could be that there's just been too much and your child's been working really hard to manage all of this and then needs to go into have a blowout or needs to go into meltdown. So it might be an idea to think, how do I reduce some of the activities here so I avoid that cumulative effect? Is there a quiet space, a low arousal space that your child could go to, especially if you are going to somebody else's house? If your child is feeling overwhelmed in somebody else's house, where can they go to where they can just remove themselves and just help to self-regulate? Be flexible and make sure that this is, you know, part of what you are saying to everybody at Christmas. We might come on Boxing Day, or we might not. We might come, but we might not stay for 7 hours. We might just come and pop in and see you all and leave quite quickly. Just give yourself that flexibility that is acceptable, and you know that the people that you're spending Christmas with will understand this. That if you need to leave, you need to leave, basically. Okay, let's think about, we talk about self-regulation strategies. Let's think about doing some what I call self-agency work. with your child around asking them to focus upon what they can control within a situation. An obvious one would be, of course, that if you're feeling overwhelmed, then one of the things you can do is take yourself out of that situation for a period of time. So what can you control within that situation? And I know a lot of parents and carers who have negotiated with their children kind of non-verbal signs or messages. How does your child communicate to you that they're starting to feel overwhelmed? Maybe they're starting to feel some of those physical manifestations we talked about a couple of minutes ago, and before they go into that the A of the HPA axis, how can we preempt this? Well, how can they communicate this to you? Sat around the Christmas dinner table with 25 other people, that actually they just need some help and support, or just need some, need some time away from this, and then you can act on this as quickly as possible. I'm a huge advocate of what we call go-tos, or what I call go-tos, which means that how does your child self-regulate themselves? What do they do to calm themselves? Many neurodiverse children come home from school, for example, on a daily basis, and they are very wound up, and they need some time to kind of decompress. So what do? And can we bring some of this into the Christmas period? So if they listen to music, if they're just on their own in a quiet, darker space, if they have particular immersive interests, which of course we know is a common feature of autism, but also with ADHD, it's called hyper focus. If there are things that they'll really hyper focus on, then can we bring some of this into the Christmas period, where if they are starting to feel overwhelmed, what can they do? Also, many parents use mantras, or they have messages on phones, for example. Sorry for the typo there, that should say on phones, where, reaffirming affirmations, guidance, things that their parents have written. This is okay, what you're feeling. You felt this before. We've dealt with this before. You can handle this. If you do X, Y, and Z, then you can help to self-regulate yourself. Encourage your child to be progressively more proactive themselves and show self-agency in their ability to begin to recognize those feelings in themselves, but to put strategies in place to then manage it. And let's think about everybody else. Let's have those conversations with the people that they're spending Christmas with. And I know that some of this can be challenging for some of you, and I'm sure some of you have experienced stigma, because of your child's neurodiversity from other people in your life. Did you know there's a name for it, everyone? It's a courtesy stigma. It's called stigma that you might experience courtesy of your son or daughter. And is there an honest and open conversation to be had with your relatives and your friends about, this is what life is like for my child. This is what a different, very stimulating time of year like Christmas could be like for your child. This is what my child's passionate about. This is what they're interested in. So why don't you talk to my child about this and try to engage them? What are suitable gifts to give to my child? What to avoid particularly? And practice, and I know that some of you will have been through this, being kind with other people. Other people's knowledge of neurodiversity may not be to the same extent of yours. I'm not using that as an excuse. So there's a kindness here, right? But also there's a firmness, isn't there? So if my child needs to go and be on their own, there's no value judgment there. They're not being antisocial. They're not being aloof or dismissive or moody. This is because my child has this neurocognitive profile that requires that at times. Can you please facilitate that if we come to your house over the Christmas period? You might want to rehearse with people a kind of neutral talking points, that would avoid any challenges or difficulties, or risk raising the anxiety for neurodiverse children. And then you, of course, would be ready to intervene and redirect the conversation onto something more comfortable if the conversation, for example, is becoming stressful for your child. But I think there's an important job to do, isn't there? And I know some of you will think, I've been doing this so much, and I've had to do this repeatedly with people over and over again. But it can be a good preemptive strategy to avoid certain difficulties that might lead to dysregulation. I mentioned before about meltdowns and about how we can support children after the meltdown to have that discussion around, encouraging your child to reflect upon that experience, because it can be really quite challenging. I was going to use the word traumatic, and I am going to use the word traumatic in some cases, especially, for example, if your child's, been screaming, shouting, throwing things in a room full of relatives and friends. That, on reflection afterwards, can be really challenging for your child, and therefore we owe it to them, don't we, to have that conversation around, what happened, how can we recognize what you were feeling in that moment. It's not about colluding with your child. One of the features for some people who are autistic is something called alexithymia. If you've never heard of it, have a look at it. And it means having challenges around not only recognizing your own emotions, but being able to talk about them and discuss them after the fact. Interoception refers to your body's mechanisms for triggering you in terms of your basic bodily needs. So for some autistic individuals, of course, when their body triggers them to drink because it's telling them they're thirsty or hungry or too hot or too cold, for example, those messages might not be clear, or they might not be as effective as a warning system for as neurotypical people, and therefore your child, is feeling uncomfortable because, for example, they want to go to the toilet, but because of interoception, they're not recognizing that is what my body is telling me. And it's about understanding this, thinking about how does that relate to my son or daughter. Not every autistic individual will experience this, for example, but it's important that your child is able to begin through their childhood and adolescence to talk about what it is that they feel, how they are feeling. And we've all seen those picture cards of people's faces, which are used with many autistic children to get them to understand what different emotions are and how they're feeling. But it will help your child to explain what they've just been through. And the more that they begin to be comfortable with that, the more that we can then start to say, well, when you feel those signs and signals in your body happening, what can we do to encourage self-regulation? And finally, everyone, and some of you are going to laugh at me now, I know you are, here are just some strategies that are very, very often used with neurodiverse young children, young people, particularly autism and ADHD. Now, I've tried some of this. I've tried mindfulness. Didn't really work for me. I found it quite difficult. It's not for everybody, let's be honest. I tried yoga a couple of years ago. I found yoga was really slow. I got a bit bored. I'm much happier on a treadmill, moving quickly if I want to move my body. But, try some of these strategies on this slide to see if they might work. Muscle relaxation. There's a technique called progressive muscle relaxation, where the child is stood up and you tense the muscle groups in your body progressively, hold them for a certain period of time. What's recommended is 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds release, but that might get longer the older your child is, of course. But that can be a good self-regulation strategy. Breathing deeply, teaching your child belly breathing. You can't feel anxious if you're breathing from your belly. It's physically impossible. So breathing is often the first port of call, isn't it, when your child is feeling dysregulated. Technology can help. There is a lovely set of programs from a Belfast company called Take 10, where there are games and programs that your child puts their thumb on a device, and on the screen it shows their heart rate. Okay, and to be successful in the games, they have to modulate their heart rate. They have to slow their heart rate down through breathing deeply. Okay, so it's encouraging your child to recognize those signs and to slow their breathing right down, focusing just on their breathing as a way of beginning to self-regulate. Recovery days, of course, is have a think about this. If you've got a very busy Christmas day planned with maybe going to a number of different places with different people, okay, lots of socializing, well, why can't Boxing Day be a recovery day where your child just gets to do exactly what they want, for the whole day? And you give them the space and the time to recover from that very, very busy Christmas and New Year. Okay, I'm going to go back to Molly now, everyone, in a minute. But just to say thank you very much, everyone, for your engagement. I hope that you've just found that presentation interesting. If you can't stay for the Q&A, can I just say I wish you all a very happy Christmas, whatever that looks like and whatever that means to you, and also particularly, of course, to your children if they are neurodiverse. I hope they really have the Christmas that works for them this year. Okay, thanks very much, everyone. Thanks, Molly. Have we got any questions?
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks so much, Colin. We've had loads coming in, so let's try and get through as many as we can in the 10 minutes we've got. The first one is, could you give some recommendations of how to manage or regulate the anger outbursts and explosive behaviour of an ADHD child?
Okay, thanks very much. Have we got a name, Molly?
Yeah, no? It's Marina.
Hi, I'm Marina. Thanks very much for that. I don't know, obviously, how old your child is, Marina. But it's very, very common, of course, for children and young people with ADHD to experience emotional dysregulation. And part of that is, of course, Marina, can be with some children is that can present itself in terms of anger. We also have, Marina, we estimate, the research would suggest around 20% of children and young people with ADHD can develop what's called oppositional defiant behaviours, and you might have heard of the diagnosable condition ODD, and this is a particular trigger around authority. So your child, for example, might be absolutely fine with other children, their peers, but with anybody with authority, so for example, parents and carers, teachers, other professionals, they can be very triggered. It can often present as quite angry outbursts and defiance, for example. And what is recommended there is that your child has what's called a degree of agency within that situation, so that there is a choice-based discourse. So saying to your child, well, we can do this, we can do this. You decide what it is that you want to do. The more choice that a child feels, if they're feeling oppositional defiant behaviours, the more choice that they perceive that they have in that situation, it can help to offset some of those oppositional behaviours. But now that's only in about 20%, Marina, so I'm not diagnosing your child at all with oppositional defiant disorder. But if you're recognising that, have a Google of it. But also is thinking about, looking at your child holistically, always looking beyond the behaviour. So I'm seeing this angry outburst. What could be what has caused this? What has led up to this? And of course, Marina, I'm sure that you are thinking about your child's sleep, for example. We know many children and young people with ADHD struggle with their sleep, and those kind of dysregulated behaviours can be that your child's absolutely knackered, of course. So if that's an issue, then how do we encourage better sleep through the nighttime routine, opportunities to nap if that's possible during the day. If your child's medicated for ADHD, of course, that can exacerbate sleep problems as well. But also diet. What we recommend, of course, is a high protein diet for your child. A child who is hyperactive and impulsive anyway, consuming a lot of sugar is going to exacerbate this. And we know that children with ADHD can be real sugar addicts. They can crave sugar because sugar gives that dopamine lift that children and young people will say they feel a bit calmer after consuming sugar temporarily, but of course you only get that temporary lift with that. And remember, Christmas, of course, how much sugar do children and young people consume over the Christmas? So it might be that it's that diet is impacting on their ability to self-regulate. Also, if they're on ADHD medication, of course, they might be appetite suppressed, so they might not. The reason for the dysregulation is your child hasn't got the fuel in their body because they haven't eaten to do everything that they want to do in that moment. It could be that they're overwhelmed just with the social aspects of this. Their mind is going very, very quickly, much quicker than everybody else. You know, sitting around having a conversation with a group where there's, you know, waiting to, you know, to when do I speak, when is appropriate, when's polite and respectful to speak. For a child who might talk a lot and talk very quickly, they might become overwhelmed with this, especially if they feel that other people are kind of not responding well to this. So have a think about some of the strategies that I mentioned here, Marina, about making sure your child is very active, has lots of opportunity to move their body, vigorous cardio exercise, that they have an opportunity to do activities that they really focus in on, hyper focus for part of the time, of course, that you've rehearsed them well in terms of, you know, how do we respond socially, and particularly in bigger groups, for example. But good luck with that, Marina. Hope that's been helpful.
Great, thank you, Colin.
Thanks, Molly.
Our next one is from Helen. Any advice on how to support our son who is ADHD and autistic and has conflicting wants and needs? He loves Christmas and wants to do so many things, always seeking dopamine hits. However, his autistic side fights with his ADHD and he gets very overwhelmed and overstimulated. He needs quiet time, but won't take our advice to take a step back and have more restful days. He just wants to do things all the time, but ends up with burnout and won't accept when we say we need a rest day. Any advice?
Oh, Helen, yeah, I mean, it's so interesting, isn't it, Helen? I've been doing a lot of work this year on ADHD and autism together, and we know that this is, at the moment, the number of diagnoses for this are really, really increasing. And sometimes, Helen, I don't know how you feel, but sometimes I think we kind of at the beginning of our understanding of how those two conditions kind of interact and work together. Although, Helen, people are beginning to talk about them being the same condition, only different presentations. I think in your question, Helen, you have just represented autism and ADHD. You know, that dopamine hit, that need for lots and lots of stimulation that goes with ADHD. But as you quite rightly highlighted in your question, that with autism as well in the profile is that your children can feel dysregulated and burnt out. I think that the only one thing I can suggest, really, Helen, is thinking about when the days that rest days, if you like, and maybe we don't call them rest days because you can imagine what that would be like for somebody with ADHD, that maybe the days when there are fewer demands upon your child, or if you want to have days like this, which obviously I would encourage you to do, is thinking about what you're actually going to do on that day. What is it that you can plan for your child that is going to part way, meet the needs of that kind of that dopamine hits, as you've said, which is quite right. So maybe there's activities that he does maybe on his own or with just one or two members of the family, structured opportunities where there are fewer demands in one aspect, for example, socialization, than there are for other activities as well, or activities that he does that are physical, as I mentioned before, but don't require a lot of other skills. So if he's out riding a bike, for example, you know, it's about riding the bike. It's not about socializing or talking to anybody else, for example. But I do, and I'll go back to the point that I made to Marina as well about sleep, of course, about diet, about, you know, looking at your child kind of holistically. But it's about, I think, if we understand ADHD and that deficiency in reward, you know, what is in it for your child to have a quieter day? And again, I wouldn't use the word quieter day either, but what is the reward from that? What is he going to get from that he can see in that moment? So it's finding activities on those days that are taking some demands off him, right, but meeting those other those competing demands. But good luck with that, Helen, because, you know, and well done articulating the some of the what's fascinating, but also what is very challenging about that dual diagnosis of ADHD and autism together.